We'll be in Nehemiah chapter 2. So let's get our Bibles and let's start. As always, we'll read together the whole chapter. I think it's crucial, the way I see it, that if we're going to be learning what the Bible says, if we're going to be in context, that we are going to be reading book by book, verse by verse, we need to know what we're reading. We need to know what we're studying. Somebody approached me a couple of weeks ago and told me that they liked the fact that we read at the beginning of every message the whole chapter that we're going to be studying, even if we only covered a few verses. That makes them be aware of the context before and after, and gives them a glimpse as to what's coming, so that they themselves can look forward or look behind if they missed the message. So that is one of the reasons why. Now also, to me, if people come in, they weren't here last week, or they're not going to be here next week, at least they get like I said, a glimpse of where we were or we're going to be. So Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 1. It says, "In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was brought before him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before. So the king asked me, 'Why does your face look so sad when you are not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of the heart.' I was very much afraid, but I said to the king, 'May the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire?' The king said to me, 'What is it you want?' Then I prayed to the God of heaven. And I answered the king, 'If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city of Judah, where my ancestors are buried, so that I can rebuild it.' Then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked me, 'How long will your journey take, and when will you get back?' It pleased the king to send me, so I set a time. I also said to him, 'If it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of Trans-Euphrates, so that they will provide me a safe conduct until I arrive to Judah? And may I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the royal park, so he will give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel by the temple and for the city wall, and for the residence I will occupy.' And because the gracious hand of my God was on me, the king granted my request. So I went to the governors of Trans-Euphrates and gave them the king's letters. The king had also sent an army of officers and cavalry with me. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard about this, they were very much disturbed that someone had come to promote the welfare of the Israelites. I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, I set out during the night with a few others. I had not told anyone what God had put in my heart to do before Jerusalem. There were no mounts with me except the one I was riding on. By night, I went out through the valley gate toward the jackal well and the dung gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down, and its gates, which had been destroyed by fire. Then I moved toward the fountain gate and the king's pool, but there was not enough room for my mount to get through. So I went up to the valley by night, examining the wall. Finally, I turned back and re-entered through the valley gate. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, because as yet I had not said anything to the Jews or to the priests or the nobles or the officials or any others who would be doing the work. Then I said to them, 'You see the trouble we are in? Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem. We will no longer be in disgrace.' I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me. They replied, 'Let us start rebuilding.' So they began to do this work. But when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Geshem the Arab, they heard about it, they mocked and ridiculed us. "What is this you are doing?" They asked. "Are you rebelling against the king?" I answered by saying, "The God of heaven will give us success. We, his servants, will start rebuilding. But as for you, you have no share in Jerusalem, or any claim or historic right to it." So, before I start with the context, I want you to look at verse 17. It says, "Then I said to them, you see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the walls." Nehemiah was saying, we, us. He was including himself as part of the problem, as I mentioned before, and he was saying, including himself, let us rebuild. Let us fix this issue. He could have easily said, "You caused this problem. You go fix it. I came here, brought you supplies, brought you anything and everything that you need. So if you need me, come look for me in the office." And we know he doesn't do that later on. But let's go back. Well, let's go back to verse 6. It says in verse 6, "Then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked me, 'How long will your journey take? And when will you get back?' It pleased the king to send me, so I set a time." I had mentioned last week about the first chapter, where the whole chapter is pretty much his prayer, his seeking God. And in that prayer, the time that he spent fasting and praying, he was also planning as to how he was going to execute his plan. He was planning what it was going to take, how long he thought it was going to take, because he gives the king a specific time. He said, "I gave him a set time." So he probably told them, "It's going to take me 3 months." Which later on at the end of the book, we know it takes them 52 days to complete the task. And he says that it pleased the king. It pleased the king because the great hand of God was on him. And see, he was planning it out while he was in this 4 months of prayer. And he wasn't just being careful about what he was about to do. Back when we first started the Spanish service, if you remember, Pastor Chris was here, and he mentioned about, I mentioned about him being called to go to Mexico as part of one of the ministries that he's been given in his heart. And while we were discussing after the service, somebody asked him the question, does the church, Calvary San Antonio, have a ministry that will sponsor your trip down there? Or is there a ministry that's going to fund you going to Mexico? And I like what he said about, look, if God places it in your heart to go, you don't need no special ministry. It's good that there may be a ministry that's going to fund you, but you should not rely upon that. If God calls you, He's going to supply for you. But He also said, you can't just jump into, if God places a burden in your heart, you can't just jump the next day and say, I'm taking off. You have to leave your home, if you have a home set already where you live, in place, in order. You can't just get up the next day and forget about your job, forget about your responsibilities, your bills and all that. So Nehemiah, he was relying upon God, but at the same time being careful by faith. He was making those plans as to how, when, where, what was going to take place. And when the king said, what is it that you request? He saw the door open and said, here it is. This is how long I'm going to take. this is what I need. So it says that he said that the candle of God was on him. Verse 7 and 8 says that, I also said to him, if it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of Trans-Euphrates, so that they will provide me a safe conduct until I arrive to Judah. And then it says also, and may I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the royal park. We know it's the forest. So he will give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel, by the temple, and for the city wall, and for the residence that will occupy. And because the gracious hand of my God was on me, the king granted my request. And then verse 9 says, so I went to the governors of Trans-Euphrates and gave them the letters from the king. The king had also sent army officers and cavalry with me. So not only was Nehemiah's request given, the king gave him the okay to leave. The king blessed them. He probably did hesitate to let him go, not because he didn't trust him, but because he was such a good servant and he had a good record with them. So he probably felt like, I have to let you go, but I don't want to let you go because you're such an important person here in the kingdom, his kingdom. And of course, he's such an important person in God's kingdom. But it pleased the king, so he let him go. On top of that, all his requests, he sent people in army, cavalry, to protect him. Nehemiah didn't ask for it, but the king gave it to him. And I think that's very important whenever we are part of any ministry. It doesn't matter whether you're in children's ministry or cleaning ministry or pastoral ministry, because no matter what ministry God calls you to, He's also going to give you or prepare other people to be there by your side with you. It may be people that are going to be in the background doing a lot of the work, which a lot of the work that takes place in the church ministry is in the background. And as far as it is for a pastor, you know, I'm only here, like I said, on Sundays, and I'm only the voice. Yes, God called me to teach, and I'm the voice in a sense of what I'm teaching. But behind me, I got to have people that are going to be praying for me, praying with me, supporting me. And if I seem to be straying away from the path that God has me in, I need those people to say, hey, you need to come back over here. We just ordained Pablo 2 weeks ago. But Pablo and I have been talking for months, praying for him as to the point where we're at. But in those many conversations that we've had, he's pointed out certain things that, look, Joel, you said certain things that it wasn't wrong, it wasn't unbiblical, but people might understand it the wrong way. Or he said, maybe you should have said it this way so that people can understand it, what you're trying to. He said, I understand what you said, but other people might not understand it. And that's what I need. That's what any pastor, any ministry leader needs. Somebody that is not contest what he's teaching, but go back to the word and say, and double check, was he saying the right thing? Or check with me and say, you might have done this differently, you should have done this differently. And see, God, whenever He places somebody for any ministry, He's going to also place the right people next to you. And see, Nehemiah made this request, and the king gave him extra above and beyond what he asked for. So he says that he also requested all this, and the king gave him much more. Now let's go to Luke chapter 14. Luke chapter 14, beginning in verse 28. It says, suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, this person began to build it and was not able to finish. So we know that this passage is Jesus, the one talking. We know that he's talking about counting the cost of following him. And many people will hear that call, whatever ministry you call to. But then right away, and I can speak firsthand, those challenges are going to come at you. And they're not going to stop. Because they're going to oppose the ones I'm referring to, the enemy. His minions are going to oppose you doing something for the Lord. And I had mentioned also about how in the book of my mind went blank. It's a book where the minions are assessing what they call the patient, and the enemy is God. They talk about how the mind of the enemy works and how they want to keep us, Christians, busy away from God. How they're going to plan and everything that goes in their minds. The screw tape letters. The screw tape letters. Screw tape is the main demon. He's mentoring his own nephew. And how he even tells them, let him believe there is a God. Let him believe that he's part of the church. And engage him in all the kinds of activities that there is related to Christianity. Let him go. As long as his relationship with God doesn't grow, then we got him. And see, those challenges are going to come. Distractions. Especially distractions. At least that's the one that comes to me often. Distraction where I need to, and it may seem legit, like I need to take care of my wife. Or I may need to take care of my kids. But then I got to look back, I got to step back a little bit, and I make sure that it is something crucial that I need to be there for. I'm not saying I'm going to ignore them, but especially like in the morning, when it's my personal time to read, when it's my personal time to pray, and then a little one decides to wake up earlier than usual. Or when it's nighttime and it's again my personal time to pray, and somebody decides to go to bed late and have questions in the middle of the night. I need to make sure that I also make time for that, but then I can't ignore my time with the Lord. And of course, my time to study the Word, what I'm teaching on Wednesdays and Sundays. And that is very challenging because whenever I set myself to study, like for example on a Wednesday message or a Sunday message, somebody always has to call me, needs me, there's an incident that happened at work or whatever. There's always something, always. But I've set those boundaries and people still try to reach beyond those boundaries. So God, Jesus, even gives us an example that if you're going to follow Him, if you answer the call, which you should, you're going to have challenges. You're going to be tested. There's going to be distractions. So you got to count the cost. And we've had people fall away who give up because things get hard. And they will continue to get hard. Excuse me. If the Lord wants to bless this church, this ministry. However He wants to bless it. Whether it be growth in spiritual growth or growth in number, that's His ministry. There's going to be difficulties that we address. And I mentioned on Sunday in the Spanish service that whenever we come across a certain topic that the Bible has to address, whether it's any type of sin or our personal walk with the Lord, we need to address it. We can't shy away or skip over it. And within this church, I'm not trying to go out and different rabbit holes, but within this church, at least, we're going to be addressing sin. We're not going to be, as some people say, sin sniffers, but we're going to address issues that is going to hinder this ministry. Verse 9. It says, "So I went to the governors of Trans-Euphrates and gave them the letters the king had given me. The king had also sent an army of officers and cavalry with me. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard about this, they were very much disturbed that someone had come to promote the welfare of the Israelites." Notice how verse 10 there says that it's two different people, Sanballat and Tobiah. As we continue reading on, and it says it's still in chapter 2, there's going to be more people that are going to be joining them to oppose them. And then more and more. Why is that? Why is it that when there's at least only one person that has something to say against something that God's people are doing? I mentioned also on Sunday how freedom of speech, it's a big issue. And how I mentioned that back in California in the early 60s in the University of Berkeley, that's where it pretty much started the whole movement that we're in right now. A handful of students decided to exercise the freedom of speech, but in the wrong way. And those students that were there at the time that were really focused and wanted to do, what they were going there for, to study, were being terrorized because of these other people who decided to use the freedom of speech the wrong way, raised, chaos. And because Nehemiah, it says that Nehemiah went and cared about the welfare of these people, these other two people that came by and said that they were disturbed. They didn't like that. Now there was people that came out of captivity and they had been living there for years. How come never before, of course, when they were trying to build the temple, but between the temple and Nehemiah's time, how come before that they didn't come to oppose them? They didn't because they weren't doing nothing. They were just living without trying to rebuild the walls or rebuild the temple or gather together anymore. So there was no opposition. And now, as I was saying about freedom of speech, and also I mentioned on Sunday freedom of speech, we're in a time where everybody wants to make themselves a minority. For whatever, whether you're an illegal immigrant, whether you're Hispanic, whether you're gay, lesbian, transgender, whatever. In Facebook, and I don't even know what they are, Facebook has 56 ways that you can identify yourselves, any gender that you want. 56 ways. Why? I mean, I don't understand. I can see what they're saying, but I still don't understand why they want to make themselves a minority. feel like they're being oppressed. I don't know if you heard about the story that came out, I believe it was a Monday, about a gay pastor from Austin that's being oppressed about some cake. Well, as far as I know, that cake was phony, though, or at least the writing on there. But I'll use that as an example. If you're a pastor who's gay, right away, red flag right there. And then you go to buy a cake that you want to write on there, love wins. Red flag number 2. And if you already feel like you're a minority because you're a pastor and you're gay, why do you want to feel like you need more oppression? Attract more attention to you. Just like any other minority group right now, they're being oppressed. The big issue right now, whether we should allow people of any sex to walk into the restrooms, which they feel like it, whatever restroom they want to be a part of. And I heard this talk show guy say, well, I'm going to prove something because Target just said that they're going to be allowing anybody to walk into any restroom. So he said that he was going to do it tonight. He said, I'm going to go to Target and I'm going to walk in to the ladies' restroom. If somebody says something, I'm going to say, well, I feel like I'm a female trapped in a male body, just to try them out. And then I'm going to walk out of there, put on a dress, and then walk into the male's restroom, just to try them out, see how they like it. And whenever I see one of their employees walk into the restroom, whatever sex they are, I'm going to follow them and change my clothes and see how they like it. Now, I'm not supporting this talk radio guy, but he's very bold about what he says. What I'm getting at is that God's people at this time, they were a minority. And somebody was trying to promote their welfare. Nehemiah was trying to promote their welfare, and they found opposition. Now these people, we're talking about current times, a minority that they are, black, life matters, whatever. They want to make themselves a minority for whatever reason, agenda they want. But they don't want to allow us Christians to speak what is right. I heard this speaker today say that he's and I can't say his name or his office because I don't have permission. He has an office here in San Antonio, government office, but he's also a Christian, a Judeo-Christian. And he had to make sure he made that clear. He said, because anybody can call themselves a Christian, whether you're a denominational or non-denominational, he had to specify who he was as a Christian and what he stood for. But he said this because he's in law and he's a Christian, and whenever he's asked to come speak, he always has to make sure that he presents that and that he speaks the truth. And he says, I'm not going to compromise the truth. Now, people have asked me that whenever I come to speak to young adults, not to mention anything about my religion. He said, okay, well, I won't mention anything about religion because I'm not religious. But I will talk about Christianity. I will talk about my testimony. I will talk about who God is in my life and who Jesus Christ is. And all these people who are trying to make themselves a minority, they just want attention. And that's just one tool that the enemy is using. Now, he said, I'm not going to compromise truth, because if people get offended because of what I say, and people will ask me, well, that's your truth, that's what you believe. He said, no, that is what it is truth. Jesus said, I am the truth. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And he said, I represent a lot of people who are minorities. But after I speak to them, about who God is, about who Jesus Christ is. I'm not trying to convert them, but they leave respecting that, and then later coming back and saying thank you for being bold and for standing up for what is right. Nehemiah was standing up for what it was right then. And then the people were opposing him. 2 people. Later on we're going to see that there's more people opposing him. So if Nehemiah had a burden in his heart, he was given a task to do. He was called. Not only called, but he also waited. He was being careful. He wasn't being doubtful. He was being careful as to how he was going to take the steps. We'll continue next week, but it says, when I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, verse 12, I set out during the night and with a few others. Verse 11, it says, I went to Jerusalem. That should be a stop right there, a period. I went to Jerusalem because now he went to Jerusalem. If you remember, I mentioned about how far it was, his journey was going to be. For us, to make comparison, it's from Brownsville, Texas, all the way past Amarillo, 800 plus miles to travel for Nehemiah. Now in those times, it wasn't like you can just get in a car and drive 12 hours without stopping, or 29 hours walking, because he had animals. 29 hours like on a bicycle, but three and a half days walking. Now Nehemiah had animals that he had to stop for, so his journey was going to take even longer. And it says that after he arrived, and I'll get more into detail next week, after he arrived, he was there for 3 days. And then it continues on to say that he went out by night. So he was there 3 days. He didn't just sit there 3 days doing nothing. We're going to see what he was doing those 3 days, because later on he explains what he was doing, and then he goes out by night, and we're also going to see why he went out by night and not during the day. Let's pray.